Hello and welcome to the Capital Conversation with me, Michael Hayman. Now, my guest today is Tessa Clarke, co-founder of Olio, the food-sharing app described by The Telegraph as the Tinder for your tins and fostering for your fruit bowl. With over 1 million users have bought into Olio's mission to cut down food waste by offloading surplus food to neighbours ready to nosh. And what a journey! Tessa's story takes us from Dyson to a Duchess. Yes, the Dutchess of Sussex has just featured Olio in her guest edit of Vogue. Tessa, by royal appointment no less, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about Olio. Tell us a bit about the business.
So Olio is an app, as you say, that's tackling the enormous problem of food waste, and we're specifically focused on food waste in the home. So what we do is we connect people who have food they don't want or need with their neighbours living nearby who would like it.
And in terms of the idea for this, and I mean, it seems it's like a lot of great tech solutions. It seems like a very simple solution when you hear it. But in terms of what got you there, give us a sense of the journey that takes you to a million users.
Yeah, so retrospectively, you're right, it is kind of an obvious idea. And it was one that was really kind of born out of my own personal frustrations. So I was living overseas just over 4 years ago and moving back to the UK. And on moving day, the removal men said to me that I had to throw away all of our uneaten food. Now, I was brought up on a farm. I know how much hard work goes into producing the food we all eat every day, so I was not prepared to do this. So I kind of downed tools, stopped packing, and instead took the food and my newborn baby and my toddler out onto the street to try and find someone to share my food with. And to cut a long story short, I failed miserably.
As I say, how were you received trying to hand out bags of food? Was it?
Well, actually, there was this one person who I was hoping, who was normally there, who I was hoping to be able to give the food to, and for some reason, she wasn't there that day. And so, not to be defeated, I went back to my apartment, and when the packing men weren't looking, I smuggled the non-perishable food into my packing boxes. And I can remember thinking really vividly at the moment, this is crazy. What I'm doing is possibly criminal, but to me it seemed equally criminal to put perfectly good food in the rubbish bin when I knew that there was someone within a matter of metres of me who would really like to have it.
I mean, food waste seems to be one of those illogical problems and sort of issues, if you like, in terms of why do we do it? Why do we literally throw money away in the fridge every week?
It is honestly one of the stupidest problems that exist today, and I'll hold my hands up. I had no idea about the extent of the problem until with my co-founder Sasha we started Olio, and what we did, the first thing we did was research the problem of food waste, and it's absolutely mind-boggling. Globally, we throw away a third of all the food we produce, which is worth over $1 trillion US. Meanwhile, 800 million people go to bed hungry each night, and
so a third of everything we produce.
Third of everything I mean, hungry people, and it's devastating for the climate.
Do you think? I mean, you mentioned being brought up on a farm. I mean, do you think there is a connection between an increasingly urban world where we're disassociated from the process of growing things and seeing, I guess, the effort and nature, and actually being able to buy stuff in a supermarket and then see it in a much more disposable sense?
Yeah, I think a big part of the problem is we just don't value food anymore because we haven't actually had to produce it ourselves. And I think that's part of the reason why I hate food waste so much, because essentially my parents are still farming today, and it's like a third of their work every single day is just being tossed in the bin. I think all of us would hate to work for a day and then have a third of it thrown away.
So you've come up with an app. I can stick the stuff I don't want onto the app, and somebody gets it?
Yep, and sort of within an hour, so half of all the food added to the app is requested in less than an hour. So within an hour, you will have someone requesting that food, and then they pop round and pick it up, and you get to meet a neighbour in the process.
So it's usually a local neighbour, is it?
It's all about hyper-local. It's about connecting people.
Yeah.
At the moment, we live in our tiny boxes stacked on top of each other, beside each other. We don't know each other, and we're just connecting neighbours to share
What's
food.
the most popular product on the site?
Well, we have an enormous variety, but I always smile. I see a lot of tea being shared. Clearly, we're a nation of tea drinkers.
Right.
We like to experiment with our tea, but sadly, we often don't like the more sort of obscure flavours. So what do you do with 49 tea bags that you don't like the flavour of?
So that would be what? Because I just don't like the tea.
I don't like that flavour that I've experimented with, and at the moment, people sort of leave that box of tea sitting in the back of their cupboard for years, and eventually they throw it away. Now they can share it with a neighbour instead.
Is there a difference between the way people deal with, I guess, sealed goods and things that people had in their fridge? I mean, how close to sell by date, and I mean, and actually how do you guarantee it's safe?
Yeah, so people are sharing food from their fridges, their cupboards and their freezers. The only rule that we have is that you mustn't share any food after its use-by date, because a use-by date is a health and safety date. So that's something that would be applied to sort of dairy products and meat and fish. But food after its best before date is absolutely allowed on Olio.
I mean, I read something that you said about Airbnb, that, you know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we were, you know, the idea of having strangers in your house was, you know, sort of really not something you would do. Now we're a nation of the sharing economy. I mean, when you take that, though, to the next level, to food that we may have had in our fridge, we may have partially consumed. I mean, how personal does that? How personal are we prepared to be with the things we're prepared to share? Well,
and that was exactly the sort of question that I had from people when I first came up with the idea of Olio. They said, you know, strangers sharing food, isn't that weird? But what I like to point out is that actually humans have been sharing food for 2 million years. What's weird is that in the past 30 to 50 years, we've decided to put perfectly good food in a bin where there's someone living next door who would like it. But it's got to be tried. So this gets us back to a more natural... It does. We've evolved to dislike throwing away, quite frankly, what keeps us alive. You know, it's our life source. And also we've evolved to feel really great to give food to someone who wants it, or sadly in this day and age maybe even needs it. So you've experimented in the B2B marketplace before, and actually where you've got to is the consumer and actually activating the consumer. Tell us a little bit about what you learned on the way in that journey from a business model perspective. Yeah, so Olio has two aspects to what we do. We're sort of connecting neighbours to share food, and then we also are connecting our volunteers, who are called Food Waste Heroes, with their local business, and they will then collect the unsold food from the business at the end of the day, take it home, add it to the app and redistribute it to the community. Both of those are really important parts of what we do, but when you look at the problem of food waste overall, and this is really shocking to most people, food waste, say at a supermarket level, is less than 2% of all food waste. Well over half of all food waste is us in the home. So our sort of vision of Olio really is about getting hundreds of millions of people, billions of people connected and sharing food from their homes. But I suppose when you're a business, efficiency and waste go hand in hand in terms of what you cut out. If we had the same attitude, presumably, to home, I mean, do people have a sense of how much money they're wasting? I mean, no. So, and again, you know, I didn't know this either until I sort of came into this area, but the average UK household throws away just under a quarter of their weekly shop. That's worth £800 a year, and collectively British households are throwing away £15 billion worth of perfectly good food. Businesses, on the other hand, you know, they manage their margins, they manage their inventory very, very tightly, and they're throwing away between, say, 0.5% and 1% of everything. I mean, you've got 1 million users. Give us a sense of, I mean, who are they? Are these eco-warriors? Are these people that are buying into a bigger agenda for sustainability in the planet? Or are these everyday homes? Give us a sense of the user base. What has really, really amazed us is actually the sheer diversity of people, and we're often asked this question, who is the typical Olioer? And actually we say it's much more about a mindset rather than a specific demographic. So we have everyone from students to pensioners, you know, professionals, stay-at-home mums, people who, like us, believe that it's just common sense to share food rather than toss it in the bin. But I mean, I read something where you said, you know, everything from the kind of £8 million Bishop's Avenue house through to actually people that are in first homes that are. I mean, in terms of what they buy into, the attitude that they buy into that you've mentioned, what's the link? What's the thread? I think there's sort of two things that people are really buying into. One, I think people recognise that we are in a climate crisis right now, that food is valuable and precious, and it shouldn't be thrown away. So there's definitely kind of a sustainability, environmental thread to what we're doing. But the other one, which is often overlooked, but actually is arguably the more powerful one, is the community. People are telling us that it feels amazing to meet a neighbour in real life, and that's fun. They feel safer in their communities, they feel more connected, and they just feel empowered. So are people making friends out of it? People are making friends. I mean, how far does it go? Do people date off it? We have had a couple move in with each other. We're waiting for our first Olio
shared
marriage.
Interest in food?
Well, obviously, yes. Yeah.
So, well, I mean, that's great. I mean, but in terms of like So therefore, in terms of what people need to buy into, and you mentioned the climate change issue, I mean, do people necessarily understand the link? I mean, you've just been recognised by the United Nations for this in terms of the link between food waste and climate change. I mean, is it obvious to people that what they're doing with the food in their fridge might actually have a long-term impact on the climate?
So I think it isn't at all obvious to people. And what's really surprising is that food waste is the third largest source of greenhouse gas emissions after the USA and China. And to your point about sort of my personal impact, it's very easy to think, well, what difference do I make? What difference does it make if I throw out a couple of bananas this week? The reality is there's another 28 million households who are also throwing out a couple of bananas this week. And that's where we get to kind of the staggering proportion of food waste that's generated by homes.
I mean, we're going to the break in a second, but is the goal here to activate that million members to, you know, sort of continue to exponentially grow into getting people to buy into the attitude?
Well, our goal, given that we are in the midst of a climate crisis, is actually to get to 1 billion people using Olio within the next 10 years. And that is because that's what the planet needs us to achieve. We cannot continue to live in a world in which we throw away a third of all the food we produce. And so we want to empower everybody to get involved, connect and share.
Time for a short break, and when we come back, we'll discuss what it takes to turn that billion people ideas into $1 billion business, and also what it takes to be in Vogue. We'll be right back. Welcome back. My guest today is Olio co-founder Tessa Clarke. Now, Tessa, before the break, we spoke a little bit about the movement, about, I guess, the idea that's driving it. Tell us a bit about the business. I mean, first of all, you've co-founded it. Tell us about your co-founder.
So my co-founder is Sasha Celestial One.
Great name. I have to say...
Wonderful name.
I would love to be Michael Celestial One. I mean, what tell us about
we do have some fun when we're sort of going into investor offices in the heart of Mayfair, and the receptionist sort of doing a double take.
What, are you from the Hampshire Celestial Ones? Or, I mean, how do you get a name like that?
So her parents were hippies from the Midwest, so Iowa in the US, and that is her actual name, Sasha Celestial One.
Wasn't it something that they wanted her to remember to do good, or...?
Well, yes, she's never going to be forgotten, and yeah, she's got lofty heights to live up to, and she's doing a great job.
And together, you are a double act that's been out there raising funding for this business. I mean, you know, we hear a lot about just how poor it is to be, the experience is to be a woman raising money in the city, 1% of UK venture capital going to female-led businesses. Tell us about how you got it right.
Well, with a lot of blood, sweat, tears and persistence, quite frankly. It's something that I actually find incredibly frustrating, especially when we have a business like Olio that we know has such enormous potential and can have massive impact. It's very galling to know that only 1% of all VC investment goes to female-founded businesses, in contrast to 89% that goes to male-founded businesses. Yeah, go on.
But, well, just the experience. I mean, so the practical part?
What we have found through pitching to hundreds of investors now is that, sadly, our ability to sort of convert female investors is much higher than our ability to convert male investors, and so as a result,
women understand it more quickly. Why the difference? Are men less interested in this whole debate about planet and purpose, do you think?
So I think it's a combination of that. We do definitely find that women are generally very, very interested in community-oriented solutions and sustainability-oriented businesses. I think, though, also, at the end of the day, we're solving a problem that a lot of women can relate to, because still, even in this day and age, the women are often responsible for the kitchen. And so that problem of trying to balance supply and demand of food in your home and make sure you're not throwing away food the whole time is something that the female investors
Didn't you even feel you had to make a commitment not to have any more children in raising the funding?
Well, I think the reality is there are lots of intricacies and subtleties that sit around being a female founder, one of which is the concern as to how committed are we, what might happen in our private life.
You had to make that commitment.
Proactively make it very clear that we're at the stage in our lives where we are 100% committed to the business. And
so what changes it? I mean, there have been things like the Rose Report, things that are highlighting the need for more diverse teams and more diverse funding. But in terms of a practical change, in terms of what makes it easier for a business like yours with a great idea to raise the funding, what if you could wave a magic wand, what would it be?
Yeah, if I had a magic wand, the first thing I would do would be to increase the diversity at a check writing level of the gateholders of capital, because then we would see far more diverse founders getting funding. And this isn't just about them sort of doing a nice thing, it's smart business sense. All the data shows that businesses that are founded by more diverse teams actually outperform, and so it's a great investment opportunity.
I mean, you hear a lot of them talking about it. Saul Klein was saying, you know, they've got a 50-50 investment team now of men and women. But I mean, despite the kind of, you know, I guess the highlights in terms of why that is not now a mainstream, if it's good for business, why isn't business doing more of it?
I think the reality is that this is a topic that has only really hit the headlines in the past 12 to 18 months, and it does take time for change to happen. And whilst a number of firms are doing great jobs in the sort of lower ranks, the reality is that until we have true diversity at the check writing level, then we're not going to see an enormous amount of change happen.
And yet, despite all of that, you've said that now is an amazing time to be a female founder.
It is.
Why?
Yeah. I think because ultimately, fantastic investment returns are delivered by businesses that are solving real problems. And I see so many female founders, so many founders from diverse backgrounds, tackling the biggest problems facing humanity today.
Yeah.
And I think we're all collectively realising that we need to be shifting our dollars towards these businesses that are driving transformation.
I mean, and I think this is what makes your business so fascinating, is because, you know, historically, an issue like food waste might be the sort of thing that, say, a government might take sort of ownership of through public information announcements, but actually, you're one of the, you know, the wave of entrepreneurs where business is the tool, business is the solution. Tell us how. Tell us. I mean, I suppose, how do you take ownership of such a massive issue like this? And are there any barriers when you do this?
Yeah. So we get quite frustrated, actually, that we tend to encounter this dichotomy, which is either you're a charity and you do good, or you're a business that delivers brilliant financial returns but probably does terrible things to the planet and the community in the process. We passionately believe that the third route is the right route, the one that's going to prevail, which is profit with purpose. And that it is, in fact, only businesses that generate profits with purpose that are going to deliver the fantastic returns.
So how do you make profit? I mean, how does it work from Olio's point of view?
So we started generating revenues about a year and a half ago through charging the large businesses for the services that we provide to enable them to be zero food waste. So instead of them paying a waste contractor to take that food off to landfill where it gives off methane, instead they pay us to redistribute that food where it's eaten and appreciated by the local community.
So how far can you scale that? I mean, because as you say, I mean, a lot of people will sit here and think, oh, well, it's a lovely social business, but to what? I mean, we talked about the $1 billion business. I mean, can you be that successful, that scale, that big? I mean, presumably you have to be to reach the 1 billion people.
Of course. So that's the revenue stream that we have started monetizing. As you all know, revenue generation is a journey, and we absolutely plan to introduce a number of other revenue streams for Olio. But right now, where we're at in our journey, given that we're the world's first, the world's only neighbour-to-neighbour food sharing app, we've been focused on growth and engagement and getting us towards that 1 billion users, and then the monetisation is something that we're sort of coming on with.
You're a business, you're quite literally in Vogue, as in this month's edition.
Yes.
You've been chosen by the Dutchess of Sussex as one of her forces for change in her guest editorship of Vogue. I mean, tell us a little bit about that process. I mean, I understand you had what she described as a discreet meeting. I mean, what is a discreet meeting with a Duchess? Tell us more.
Sounds terribly exciting, doesn't it? Well, obviously, I think it's
to meet in secret.
Yeah, exactly. I think all sort of meetings with the royal family are probably considered pretty discreet. But we had a really, really fantastic conversation about our work and about our plans to sort of try and improve the world. And obviously, being featured in Vogue and name-checked in her letter was an incredible honour. And it really helped to shine a light on the work that we're doing at Olio and sort of not just Sash and I as co-founders, but actually our community and our team.
What's the feedback been?
So it has been overwhelmingly positive so far. I think people have really respected the fact that the Duchess has used her platform to shine a light on people who are trying to be optimistic in a world that at the moment I think too often can feel a bit depressing and overwhelming. We have had a few pieces of negative coverage too that have kind of, picked through my past, but we're trying to kind of move on from that.
So tell us about your past is what, Dyson, you did a bit of time with Wonga as well.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
But presumably that's part of your journey, is it, in terms of where you've got to?
Yeah, it absolutely is part of the journey, and indeed we wouldn't be here today with Olio were it not for everything that I've learned along the path.
I mean, in terms of how you felt about some of that negative coverage, I mean, just very briefly, because I would like to just cover off your journey as well. But in terms of how you felt about, I think it was a Mail, was it Daily Mail or Mail Sunday piece? Just your thoughts about that, because it was a particular type of representation.
Yeah, I mean, I was devastated and angry in almost equal measures, because it was a very sort of tenuous link between a very small part of my past to the Dutchess of Sussex and her work through Vogue. So I was very frustrated by that sort of.
Do you think, does that feed into a broader issue about how we celebrate the positive, do you think?
I think that we do have a tendency in certain parts of the British media to sort of tall poppy syndrome, to sort of cut things down. And what was particularly frustrating is, as I've said several times already, we're in the midst of a climate crisis. We need to be focused on the real problems here. And
in terms of what takes you to that focus, I mean, as we said, you've had a corporate career, you've worked, you've worked with some, with Dyson, but on a kind of manufacturing innovation side, you've worked in the payday loan side. I mean, but actually now where you sort of arrive as this sort of purpose champion, if you were to sort of summarise for us what you've learned about yourself, what's the essential Tessa lesson, do you think?
I think it's been a real kind of 0 to 1 experience working on something with true purpose, and in particular, as I sort of look at it, I'm in the second half of my life now, whether I like to accept it or not. I have 2 young children, and so as I'm thinking about the world that they're going to inherit, that is what really drives me forward with a massive urgency to really focus on the stuff that matters.
We're going to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me on The Capital Conversation. And that's all we have time for this week. And thanks to my guest, Tessa Clarke, the food waste warrior with a vision for 1 billion people. A force for change, she's brought tech to one of the greatest challenges of our time, food waste. And for more pioneers charting a course for change, join me for the next Capital Conversation. I'll see you then.